There are over 130 people on North Carolina death row. This is part 5 of the series. Anhel Gavara, 28 years on death row. Gavara received a death sentence for the murder of Paul West, a Johnston County deputy. He was found guilty of shooting West's manager, Lieutenant Ronald Medlin, and assaulting him with a deadly weapon with the intent to kill or seriously hurt him. While testifying that he shot West to protect his girlfriend's son from the cop, Gavara acknowledged shooting West. Medlin stated in his testimony that he witnessed the entire incident from outside of Gavara's mobile home and that West was holding his right palm overhead rather than a gun. Gavara fled the shooting and made his way to New York, where he was apprehended while using a payphone at Penn Station. Wallace Thomas, 28 years on death row. He was convicted of stabbing his childhood friend's mother, leading to a 5-year prison sentence. In 1994, he was accused with 3 additional violent offenses, including robbing 2 individuals at gunpoint and attempting to assay a lady, less than 6 months after his parole. Thomas was always released from prison before his trial. He signed his name twice, pledging to appear in court again if needed. The last time, Thomas's lawyer convinced the judge to impose a $500 cash bond for him. Thomas was detained and accused of being responsible for the death of Kenny Tuttle, a college student, a year after he was released from prison. In the kitchen of the house Tuttle rented in Greensboro, the body was found by the police. There was a black telephone cord around his hands. He had sustained 36 stab wounds. James Davis, 28 years on death row. After being fired from the tool manufacturing plant in Asheville a few days prior in 1995, James killed Frank Knox, Tony Bello, and Gerald Allman when he broke into the building. Everyone who knew James at the time of the killings assumed he suffered from a severe mental illness. He shot phantom groundhogs in his yard, chatted to himself, and lived in near seclusion in the years prior to his crime. James turned himself in, and on the day of the shooting he seemed to be hearing voices and having hallucinations, according to investigators who spoke with him. He had to be given so much medication before his trial that it was impossible for him to speak clearly and sustain a cohesive conversation. In addition to suffering from terrible childhood abuse and mental illness, Davis never fully recovered from the psychological wounds he sustained during 2 grueling combat tours in Vietnam, even though he did survive a shrapnel wound. Melvin White, 28 years on death row. In 1996, White received a death sentence for killing an elderly Craven County woman and her boyfriend. White continues to claim innocence. On 2 counts of first-degree murder, he was found guilty. His attorneys contend that the science used to convict White is flawed and may have been untrustworthy in their attempt to secure a second trial for him, although they have not been successful in doing so thus far. A hearing has not been granted to him. The only forensic evidence connecting him to the killings is a countrywide trail of bullets and an SBI analyst's statement that every single one of them originated from a single gun. The detectives never uncovered any guns in White's case, and White was never found in possession of one. Lawrence Peterson, 28 years on death row. On February 9, 1996, he was charged with first-degree murder in connection with the July 5, 1995 robbery of Jewel Scarborough Braswell, a 67-year-old owner of a general store and groceries in Richmond County. The doctor who conducted Mrs. Braswell's autopsy stated that he discovered 5 gunshot wounds that went all the way through her body. Massive bleeding and injury to the lungs, liver, colon, and spinal cord resulted from 4 of those wounds. The investigators discovered multiple bullet pieces and 5 bullet holes behind Mrs. Braswell's seat at the counter area of the store where she was shot. 5 shell casings were discovered by investigators inside the business. Henry Wallace, 27 years on death row. Nicknamed the Taco Bell Strangler, he killed Fashonda Bethea at the beginning of 1990 and threw her into a lake near his hometown. Her body was not found for weeks. Although the police questioned him about her death and abduction, he was never legally charged with her murder. He was also questioned over the attempted essay of a 16-year-old girl from Barnwell, but no charges were brought against him for that incident either. By then, he had lost his employment as a chemical operator and his marriage had broken down. He broke into both his former high school and the radio station he worked for in February of 1991. He was apprehended attempting to pawn video and recording equipment that he had stolen. He moved to Charlotte, North Carolina in November of 1991. He was able to secure employment at a number of East Charlotte fast food outlets. He picked up Sharon Nance, a former drug dealer and prostitute, in May 1992. Wallace killed her by beating her, then he abandoned her body by the railway lines. He did this because she asked for money for her services. A few days later, she was discovered. At Caroline Love's flat, he choked her to death and disposed of her body in a forested area. He and her sisters went to the police station and filed a missing persons report. It would take until March of 1994, or nearly 2 years, for her remains to be found in a Charlotte woodland. On February 19, 1993, he visited Shauna Hawk at her house where he killed her, and then he attended her funeral. He murdered Audrey Spain, a co-worker, on June 22. After 2 days, her body was discovered. Wallace killed Valencia Jumper on August 10, 1993, and then set her on fire to hide his crime. He and his sister attended Valencia's funeral. He visited Michelle Stinson's apartment in September 1993, a month later. Michelle was a single mother of 2 sons and a struggling college student. In front of her oldest kid, he stabbed her and strangled her. His only child was born that October. Wallace killed Vanessa Little Mack at her apartment on February 20, 1994. At the time of her passing, Mack had 2 kids, ages 7 and 4 months. Wallace robbed and strangled Betty Jean Bocom on March 8, 1994. Then he stole some things from the property and took her car. Everything was pawned by him, with the exception of the car, which he left at a mall. On the same day, Wallace returned to the same apartment building, knowing that Vernon Woods would be at work, intending to kill his girlfriend, Brandy June Henderson. That evening, Wallace choked both Henderson and her son Therese. He robbed the apartment before leaving. 2 bodies of young black women were discovered at the Lake apartment complex, prompting the police to step up patrols in East Charlotte. Wallace nevertheless entered covertly to rob, strangle, and stab Deborah Ann Slaughter. The date of her discovery was March 12, 1994. The next day, Wallace was taken into custody. He admitted to killing 10 women in Charlotte over the course of 12 hours of interrogation. He gave a detailed account of the woman's appearances, his drug addiction, and how he essayed, robbed, and killed the women. Leroy Man, 27 years on death row. Janet Noble Hauser was robbed by Leroy and Cindy Mann, after which she was thrown from the Falls Lake Bridge in the northern region of Wake County. Christopher Roseboro, 27 years on death row. He is on death row for the essay and murder of a 72-year-old Gastonia woman. In March 1992, Martha Edwards was murdered at her residence on West 2nd Avenue. Evidence presented during the trial suggested that Edwards was essayed while she was dying, or possibly even after her death, and Roseboro also robbed the residence. Errol Moses, 27 years on death row. In 1997, Moses was found guilty of first-degree murder in connection with the shooting deaths of Jacinto Dunkley and Ricky Nelson Griffin. Testimony suggested that drugs had a role in the killings. Moses was given 2 death sentences. Michael Brexton, 27 years on death row. Brexton was already serving a life sentence for killing a man during a robbery in Raleigh when he was sentenced to death in 1996 for the murder of another prisoner at the Caledonia Correctional Center in Halifax. He was operating an unlawful canteen and cards business at Caledonia, according to court filings. Dwayne Morris Caldwell was a man who owed him $17. When other prisoners combined their funds to settle Caldwell's obligation, Brexton returned their funds, explaining that it was a principal thing. In the shower, he proceeded to stab Caldwell 18 to 20 times. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.